Hi, it's Rachel Abbott and welcome back to the Standard Podcast. Following Wednesday's PMQs, the government has responded to the Grenfell Tower Inquiry, setting out what they call tough new reforms to fix building safety and strengthen accountability. Wearing a green heart pin designed to honour and remember victims of the Tower fire, Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner stepped forward to announce the news.
This government accepts that the final report of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry must be the catalyst for long-lasting, systemic change. All members of the House, past and present, will have shared my anger over its shocking findings.
The government says they will ensure all new homes are safe, secure and built to the highest standard, benefiting millions of people across the country.
The inquiry report made 58 recommendations, of which 37 were directed at the government. The government accepts the findings of the report and will take forward all the recommendations. Our response, published today, addresses each in turn and goes further to set out our wider reforms of social housing and on the construction sector. As we make these vital changes, we will publish quarterly reports on the progress and update Parliament annually. The government is open to scrutiny and will remain accountable for its actions.
Grenfell Next of Kin, a group representing some of the bereaved, said it will be paying close attention to these words and intentions. This news of new reforms comes nearly 8 years after the fire, which destroyed the 24-storey Grenfell Tower block of flats in West London, resulting in the deaths of 72 innocent people. The timeline for wider change is set out in phases, with a suggestion that some reforms are unlikely to be delivered before 2028, 11 years on from the fire. Joining me now is the London Standard's chief political correspondent, Rachael Burford. Rachel, thanks for joining us. Could you run us through the reforms that were set out today?
Yeah, so Angela Rayner made a statement in the Commons, basically saying the government is going to be accepting the recommendations from the Grenfell Tower Inquiry. There's quite a few recommendations in there and reforms set out today, so I'll go through the top ones. There's going to be a new single construction regulator to ensure those responsible for building safety are held to account. There will be tougher oversight of those responsibilities for testing and certifying, manufacturing and using construction products. There will be more what they're calling empowering of social housing residents to challenge landlords and demand safe and high quality housing. That's after the residents of Grenfell Tower, after the fire, said that they had been speaking to the council and individual landlords in the building for years in some cases about safety problems, and they were never acted on. And then lastly, just sort of ensuring a lasting transparency and accountability, and there'll be a sort of publicly accessible record of all the public inquiry recommendations. There's quite some strong language from Angela Rayner saying the companies whose products were used in Grenfell Tower that helped the horrible fire spread through the building, they will be investigated.
Rachel, it's been 7 years, almost 8. Is this the answer the inquiry has been waiting for?
Yeah, this has obviously been a long process. It's been over 7 years since the fire happened in 2017. It's gone over 2 separate governments now, happened under Conservative government and now obviously under a Labour administration. There's always a mixed response from the survivors of the fire and the bereaved families. You know, this has come just after Angela Rayner announced the building would actually be demolished and taken down earlier this year. So there has been a sort of a renewed interest and a renewed, a lot more news about Grenfell for people that are not directly impacted by the fire in recent months. And obviously the inquiry took a long time and, it's a very substantial report. The brief from the fire have said that they welcome the commitments that Angela Rayner has made today, but they'd sort of be paying close attention to how they progressed. And you can see why they have sort of suspicion of these people in charge, because what's come out about the fire, all these things about how, they were let down by the people that should have been dealing with their safety. You can see why they're sort of suspicious. They are going to be keeping an eye on what is actually happening and whether these recommendations do actually come to fruition.
And what mistakes did the Deputy Prime Minister reflect on?
She called, said companies whose products were used in Grenfell Tower will be investigated over their disgraceful mercenary behaviour. She said it was shameful the way some of them acted. And the report found that they had acted with systemic dishonesty and they missold and marketed their products in dishonest ways. There were products that were used in Grenfell Tower, most notably the cladding, that was not fire safe and did contribute to that horrible inferno which killed 72 people. And it hasn't just been the loss of life that has come from this. There are now thousands of leaseholders across the country living in what they now know are unsafe flats because they also have this sort of cladding or similar cladding on them. And their lives have been massively affected by the fire too.
Welcome back. Rachel, what has the Building Safety Minister, Alex Norris, said?
Yeah, so Alex Norris has also spoken out about the inquiry today and the recommendations. He's the Building Safety Minister, and he just said the fire, it was a preventable tragedy and the failings it exposed have demanded fundamental change. And obviously, this change has taken a long time to come about, and there still have not been any charges or anyone held criminally responsible for the fire at Grenfell. But Mr. Norris said that the response today to the inquiry's findings sets out a comprehensive plan to reform the construction sector and strengthen oversight and make sure that residents are the priority when deciding on building safety issues. They also committed to working closely with the industry and local authorities and councils and the Grenfell community to make sure that the reforms deliver real lasting change and rebuild trust. I think that's really important. It's the rebuilding of trust. There was mistrust before the fire. Because of the events leading up to it, there was a lot of mistrust after the fire, and that has continued because of how long, first of all, the inquiry took, and when the report came out, it basically reinforced all of the things that these residents and the people who survived the fire and their families had been saying for years and years and years.
So the timeline for wider change is set out in phases. Would you be able to explain that?
These reforms, it will not be quick. The timeline has been set out and it will come in phases. And the suggestion is that some of the reforms are unlikely to be delivered before 2028. And that will be 11 years on from the Grenfell fire tragedy. So, the Grenfell Next of Kin, which is a group representing some of the bereaved, has obviously said it will be paying close attention. It has said, it welcomes these reforms and welcomes the government's words, but grave mistakes and failures and corruption led to the deaths. So it will be keeping a close eye on what is actually comes to fruition. We've also got the fact police and prosecutors have previously said that investigators would need until the end of this year to complete their inquiry into the fire. And then decisions on potential criminal charges won't come until the end of around 2026, we think, if they come at all. So there's a lot still to do, and there's a lot of things that people affected by the Grenfell tragedy will be looking for.
This news today follows the government's remediation acceleration plan, which was launched in December. Could you explain what that is?
The remediation acceleration plan is about getting buildings fixed much quicker and ensuring rogue freeholders are held to account. But obviously, after the fire, that really did shock Britain. It had huge implications for people living across the country as well. People in tower blocks that have been built using this combustible, flammable material. Suddenly, all these blocks had to be checked. And while some of the cladding has been replaced on some buildings, it has not been replaced on others. And depending on where you live across the country and what kind of building you're in, there's a whole host of fire safety problems that were unveiled by Grenfell. And what you find is councils, in most cases, have been quite quick to replace cladding on buildings and do these fire safety changes that needed to be put in place. But, buildings are a mixture of leaseholds and council tenants, and, who pays for these upgrades has always sort of remained a bit up in the air. There's various different pots of money from government, but then there are, just total buildings that are owned by leaseholders or are full of leaseholders, and they have found themselves, facing these absolutely huge service charge bills, and they're still living in unsafe flats on paper, but they are unable to sell them because of the fire safety problems, and they're sort of left in limbo. So this government is committed to accelerating the plan to get all of these buildings fixed properly and fixed in a timely manner, because people have been living for, in some cases, many years in total limbo, unable to live in flats or sell flats, or living in unsafe buildings for so long through no fault of their own.
And that's The Standard. For all the latest news, head to standard.co.uk. Please do get in touch with us at podcast@standard.co.uk. And this podcast returns tomorrow at 4 p.m. We'll see you then.